All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am super excited to introduce my new friend, Olly Richards. Welcome, Olly.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, excellent. We're going to have a great time today. And I love, before we went live, we were just chatting about where Ollie lives. And I just spent some time over in the UK. He's on the south coast of England. And it was one of my favorite spots. I could have stayed. We took a particular walk down to a certain point on the Jurassic Coast. And I was carting like 20 pounds of photography equipment. And I still did not want to leave, right? And I had to hoof it down and I had to hoof it back up with all this equipment. And it was quite a walk and totally worth it. So I
Did you get good
love,
weather?
we did. It was that end, it was, it's like the shoulder seasons where there's less people and the weather is still moderately good. You're starting to get like a little bit of rain each day, but not a lot. It was so lovely. It was just
Cool.
really enjoyable.
It's the most British question of all, like, how was the weather? But the thing is here, it's capable of being like pouring it down with rain 1 minute, and then you've got rainbows everywhere you look 5 minutes later. So,
It was
people that come here, either it usually goes one of two ways.
Oh, this is it. I can relate because I'm in Seattle and like I talk to one of my sisters almost daily and it's always like weather first, right? It just I don't know. I love it. I'm not one of those people that's ever going to get tired of talking about weather because it's so integrated into other experiences in our life, right? And even the best writers, like you read a book where they incorporate like landscape or weather, even if it's not super relevant to the story, it becomes part of the setting, part of the whole experience. So anyways, I love it. But for those of you that don't know Ollie, let's get Ollie introduced. Ollie Richards, and I just love this, by the way. Ollie Richards had a series of random careers, from jazz musician to English teacher, before eventually starting a blog on his passion, language learning, and growing it into a $10 million business. Today, he writes a newsletter teaching other online entrepreneurs how to scale their businesses to 7+ figures using story learning as a living case study. As he was scaling story learning, Ollie constantly struggled to find other successful entrepreneurs who taught freely how they were growing their businesses. In the end, he had to figure it all out for himself and committed to one day providing mentorship to others looking to navigate the perils of scaling. When story learning turned 10, Ollie launched his newsletter teaching strategy and mindset to scale education companies to 7+ figures. Ollie from the UK started his career as a jazz musician in the UK, playing professionally for 7 years. He decided that career wasn't for him and instead trained as an English teacher. At 28, he took a teaching job in Japan and started a new career, later moving to Qatar and Egypt. Throughout all this time, Ollie's passion was learning foreign languages, and he taught himself 8 languages. While living in the Middle East, he decided to channel this passion into creative output and started a WordPress blog teaching others techniques for learning foreign languages. Over the next 10 years, Ollie grew his business from fledgling blog to multi-million-dollar business, publishing dozens of books and becoming one of the most renowned language companies on the internet. Today, Ollie is involved in multiple successful education companies as an investor, mentor, and advisor, but his passion is still teaching and working with others. His newsletter focuses specifically on helping 6-figure business owners make the leap to 7 figures and beyond. Ollie, that's quite an introduction. There's so much that I love about that. And in part, we actually have some similar threads. First of all, I love the series of random careers. I think a lot of people experience some real conversations around self-worth when they struggle to find something that feels like a right fit for them. And I've talked to lots of people who have made switches or, done something dramatically different and how much flack they can take from people around them in their lives doing that, right? And in the end, when you look backwards, all of those things tend to make sense, right? They tend to like create this really beautiful story. So for you, I'm really curious if you could share where your love of languages started. It seems like that is a really significant passion for you. Where did you recognize that? What age were you? How did that get started?
I can pinpoint it for you. I was 19 years old. I just quit university after 1 year. I had taken a job as a barista in a cafe called Cafe Nero in central London in the early days of that, a bit like Starbucks, basically.
Totally.
And I was there serving coffees, wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. But in the cafe, everyone else that was working there was from different countries. So we had people from Sweden, Japan, Italy, Poland. They all spoke perfect English, or good English anyway. Often they could speak each other's languages as well. So the Italian could speak with the Spaniard, and the German knew a bunch of uh, French, etc. And I was just sitting there feeling completely inadequate. And so I just had this really strong feeling at that moment that I do not want to be this typical British guy, monolingual, can't communicate with anyone else. And I committed to learning languages. And that was the genesis of everything that happened afterwards, really.
Mm, I love that. I in high school, you got to choose a certain number of electives, and I lived in a small community, rural, agricultural based, where there were a lot of folks of, Hispanic origin, right? So a lot of people speaking Spanish, and most of them actually did not speak English very well, right? A lot of them were part of essentially migratory families and were transplants and had, come at ages where they didn't learn English young. And I remember just feeling so drawn to be able to communicate with them. And so it I think it was at the start of high school that I started taking Spanish. And I ended up taking both French and Spanish all the way through high school and college. And I
Wow.
love, yes. And so I love languages so much. And the irony is, I was able to travel to both France and Spain on a senior trip that I took. And the one other place that I talked my way into was a school trip to Japan. So I love the Japan connection too. And I want to hear more about that. Where did you end up in Japan when you went there for teaching?
So, like most people, I ended up in Tokyo.
Uh,
You've kind of got two main choices if you want to go and teach English in Japan. Either you join what's called the JET program, which is the national program where they place teachers in high schools
mm,
and junior high schools. So you co-teach with Japanese teachers, and then they randomly send you anywhere across the country. The smallest backwater village you can end up, which in many ways is a great experience. But by the time I shifted careers, I was already 28. I kind of knew what I wanted. I wanted to go to
mm,
the action. So I decided I wanted to go to Tokyo. I would have gone to Tokyo. I would have happily gone to Osaka as well, or Kyoto maybe. But it's harder to get jobs in those places. So I went the easy route. I took a job where I knew I was going to be in Tokyo and spent
mm.
my whole time there.
Oh, wow. And how long did you end up staying there?
I was there for 4 years in the end.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, I went twice, and the first time I was in a little place called Kamakura, and then the second time I was in Yokohama.
Okay, so on the outskirts of Tokyo then, both times.
Uh-huh, totally. And this would have been in the 90s. I think I'm probably a bit older than you are. And so this would have been the time that I was actually in Yokohama was when all those underground bombings were happening on their trains.
Oh,
And
right, yeah.
yes, and it made the news. And anyways, it was a pretty terrible thing. But I loved my time in Japan. It was like it's absolutely on the list of places to go back. And now I have a son who's 11 who's obsessed with Japan, and I don't know where that came from. And he just talks constantly. And I said, okay, you help plan the trip and we'll go. So he's totally jazzed about
Well,
that.
be careful because you're going to end up spending your whole time in like anime stores
Yeah,
and
it's
manga
true.
cafes and things like that.
It's so true. I'm sure he wants to collect like every ninja device, he can
Yeah.
find. Yeah, totally. Um, so I love the story about how, the love of language started for you. And um once you got started, did you find that you had a real knack for it? Because it's one thing to decide, like, oh, I should learn like another language or two, but like you really pursued it to the nth degree.
So, I did languages at school as well,
Mm,
French and German. But and when I look back on that at the time, I had no reason to learn them. I did them for because I was a good student, good academic kid,
mm,
and I did whatever was put in front of me. So I did okay. I knew some grammar, I could pass my tests, but I couldn't speak the language at all. I had no
mm,
reason to. And this is often the experience of people who try and struggle to learn languages, whether they're at school or whether they're as an adult and they feel, oh, I really should learn Spanish.
mm,
Well, why? Because if you don't have a strong enough why, then you won't do anywhere near the amount of work that's required to actually learn a language properly. And learning a language takes a long time. I know on the internet, there's people saying you can learn in 7 days. It's not true. Even a language
mm,
that's relatively straightforward for English speakers, like Spanish, which is one of the easier languages that you can learn
mhm.
uh, faster than others. Italian would be another example. Takes 2, 2, 3 years plus minimum
Of
to get
consistent,
of
yes,
consistent
consistent
work
study. Yeah.
to get to a good level of spoken fluency. And then it's a lifetime of work after that. So it's really not much of a surprise that people don't succeed at learning languages.
Mhm.
So when people say, do I have a knack for it? You've got to compare like with like.
Mm,
So if you don't, or anyone in question, you seem quite good at languages. But if anyone, so someone who kind of who doesn't believe they have the language gene and they don't have a
mm.
knack for it and their memory's awful and all the other
Things
plethora
that we
of
tell
excuses
ourselves,
that
yes.
people give, if they'd done what I did, which was
Mhm,
to um live in the middle of a multicultural city, surrounded by foreign people, to learn whose languages I would take inspiration from, have enough time to go home in the evening and study for hours because I was 19 years old, and then get a one-way ticket to Paris and live in
mhm.
Paris for 6 months and just speak French the whole time and even though I was miserable, to force myself to learn and practice. I dare say that a lot of people would be able to get more done. You can't compare that with 15 minutes on the train on the way home
That's right.
once a week. It's not the same. It's like trying to run a marathon by crawling. It's not going to happen. So I may well have a facility for languages, but it's difficult to say because I French was the first language that I learned, and I was pretty good by the end of my 6 months in Paris. And what that gave me was the confidence to say, hey, I've now learned a language. I know it can be done. So then when I went on to learn Spanish after that, I wasn't starting from a place of saying, I can't learn languages. I don't have the language gene. This is not for me.
Mhm.
I knew it could be done. And so I learned Spanish, Portuguese, a number of languages from the European language, from the Latin Romance language family quite quickly, in quite quick succession. And then, progress begets progress, confidence begets confidence. And
Mhm.
the way where I come down on this now is whether or not I have the so-called language gene. I think the amount of hard work that I put into it makes it irrelevant, because whether
Right.
you have the gene or not, it's all hard work at the end of the day.
Oh, well, and what was coming to mind when you were describing that, like, right, how to assess, like, is it that I had a knack for something or just a very strong interest and a willingness to pursue it? Is this idea around luck, right? Luck is really what happens when hard work meets opportunity.
My favorite definition. And in business, it's the same, the so much of business is accounted for by luck and random events that can't be accounted for. There's a crazy statistic about stock market investing, and I'm going to butcher the statistic, but it'll give you the general point, which is that if you look at market returns over the last 100 years or so, something like 50% of, let's say you were invested in the markets for 100 years, something like 50% of the gains, or it could be even more, 80%, I don't know, came from something like 6 or 7 individual days in history where there was a big um,
Upswing.
upswing in the market. And if you
Mhm.
were not invested during those 5 or 6 days, you would have missed out on 50% of overall gains. So, the world of business in particular it's full of these huge leverage points that if you can uncover them, really just do wonders for you. Some of that is going to be accounted for by luck. Did you happen to buy crypto in 2012, for example? The other part of it is accounted for by time in the game. So this is why
just being there,
being there,
and
having a seat at the table.
Yes.
Which is why so often when I spend a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs and people kind of have this mindset of wanting quick fixes. So much of the time I kind of think about what they present to me and I turn around and say, the best thing you can do right now is just stick to your plan, keep going and see what lessons time serves you up. And so whether it's language learning or business, so much of this just kind of revolves around having a seat at the table, being in the game, continuing to learn. And that's pretty much been how I've approached life, really, whether it's music in the early stages, learning languages, becoming a music teacher. I've never, I started off by saying that learning one language gives you the confidence to learn another. I found exactly the same thing to be true with various careers that I've had. At the age of 16, I was convinced that I wanted to be a jazz musician. I fell out of love with it for various reasons. And I always knew that in the back of my mind, I quite fancy teaching English. So I went to teach English and I worked really hard. And within 4 or 5 years, I'd done a certificate, a diploma, a master's degree. I became a teacher trainer. I was an extremely highly qualified English teacher. And it kind of showed me that within 5 years, I think within 5 years, you can be top 5% in the world at anything that you choose just through hard work and grit. Which is, given the title of your podcast, sounds like we're sort of in agreement. You can very quickly become, I don't want to say world class, because world class sort of implies that you're better than everyone else, but you can be top 5% at pretty much anything within 4 or 5 years. And so I just kind of developed this confidence around, in just like I did with languages, with life, career, business, money, that whatever happened, I know that I could rebuild. And that confidence, I think, counts for a lot when you think about people. You mentioned earlier, I don't remember if it was before we started the recording, but people who, often people struggle to make the shift of changing careers and doing something very different midlife. It's unsurprising if that's the first time you've ever done something that wasn't prescribed to you at the age of 16. This whole, for me, life is just one big puzzle that's there to be solved. And the older I get, the more I think that we are just so conditioned to think that things are one way, and it's just not true.
Absolutely.
So I went a bit deep there, but
no, I love it. I think there's some really important themes that come out of what you just said. And one of them actually ties even to the reason that I launched this podcast, was this factor of stick-to-itness, like the willingness to just keep going. I mean, like you said, like commit to something and do it and see what life serves you up. It's, people do want quick fixes. And I think in the age of the internet, people believe more and more that these quick fixes are possible, whether it's in the Department of Health or business or, whatever it may be. And yet the people who really see success are the ones that have been doing it, that have been showing up day in and day out and have walked the path. And I think about how, and I actually love your observation even about this 5-year commitment. I remember the early days of learning piano. I was actually having this discussion with my husband last night because my son, who's about 11, we're about the time of year where we would be enrolling him in baseball. And this year he said, I don't want to do it. And so we're at this crossroads of do we let him quit even though he has an aptitude, there's some hurdles that we all have to get over on this learning curve of like whatever we commit to. And I know as a young person, even though I started off young trying to teach myself piano, once once my parents could afford proper lessons and I started taking lessons, I kind of hit that hump of like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. Like it's hard, you know? If I had not worked through that hump, I wouldn't have ever gone on to become like a highly trained classical pianist. Like I, traveled numerous places and won competitions and ended up at national levels of performance. And like, I think those wins, like whatever, wherever and whenever they come in life, demonstrate what you've just said about commitment, about putting in the time, and also what it takes to reach top levels. Like I was a kid, you know?
It reminds me of the question that the often asked business question of how do you know when it's time to quit or pivot
Uh,
versus double down
yes.
and continue to push through the hard times because you know the hard times are coming, but then you also don't want to flog a dead horse for longer than it needs to be flogged.
Right. And so many people don't want to give up if they think like maybe they're in that 11th and a half hour where they're almost to the reward, right? They're almost to like making things click or work.
I I have, I find it much easier to talk about that from applied to business than applied to
Mm-hmm.
kids. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
I have a similar experience with my daughter. I mean, she's 8 and she likes she's a real kind of she's an arts kid. So she goes to a local theater group. She loves singing. Um she's very much that as opposed to the more scientific kind. But there are times, as you say, when she turns around and says, I don't want to do this. Like she loves
Yeah.
singing. She needs her singing for the local theater group, but I'll be damned if I can get her to practice in the afternoon after school. And so it kind of, I find that I believe it's true what you said, that you do need to stick to things in order to have the chance or the opportunity to become great at them. But then that raises the question of, well, why do you want to become great at something? And something that I've always struggled with as an entrepreneur is knowing when to stop and when to slow down.
Yeah.
And I've come to believe that actually wanting and desiring things from a place of ego or status or anything that's not authentic to yourself is ultimately not helpful.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it's too difficult for me to say whether the years that I had when I didn't want to practice piano, for example, were possibly a sign that I shouldn't have carried on, because I did carry on and I
Mm.
got good and I went to music college, but eventually I quit. So what does
Mhm.
that actually mean that I shouldn't have? Should I just listen to should my parents have said, no, it's all right, you don't have to play the piano anymore. All right, you've been learning for 8 years, but it's okay, you can stop. And if you start to invest and really interrogate this question, this parental pressure thing, well, why do you want your child to continue to do this thing? Because I want them to be excellent at something. Why? Because then they'll be successful. Why does that matter? Because then there'll be a success at life, right? What's success? And then you take this to its logical conclusion, and then you kind of end up in places like, well, then you'll be a movie star in Hollywood or a concert pianist. It's like, what is it about that makes you think they'll be living a happy life?
Mhm.
Because a lot of the evidence is to the contrary.
Contrary. Mhm.
And so I'm really, really torn on that question, because
Mm.
in business I've seen that it's all about dedication and consistency and hard work. But I've also seen that goals and ego and all these things are unreliable narrators,
Mm.
and
Totally.
it's a dangerous game to be pursuing them all the time. And I think a lot of people get to the end of life and think, I wish I'd just been a bit more authentic to myself,
Yeah.
not
More
listen to other people
present.
so much. And so
Yeah.
I've heard that that's quite common. And so I don't have the answers to that really, other than the observation that I think a
Mhm.
lot of the time we are working towards things that we haven't really thought through on a deep level.
It's, that's such an important and relevant conversation even for the entrepreneur because I think there is a really important balance to be achieved between the work ethic and the doing of whatever it is that you're building, creating, but also knowing whether it's in line with your true, authentic self and mission versus because you just chose this path and you feel like you have to stick with it to the end. And I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and that assumes that you know what your authentic path and mission is, because I think most people have absolutely no clue.
And
Because
I
since the
think it
age of
can
16, when they
change.
had to choose what university they were going to go to, they've just
That's
been on a
right.
path that has absolutely, you're kidding yourself if you think that you chose,
Correctly.
whatever you chose at 16 was what you ended up wanting from life.
No, it's true. And I think especially the conversation around like how do we teach our children core lessons that will serve them well? I actually think it's less about what gets chosen. Obviously, you want to support your children in leaning into what seems like a natural area for them, whether it's a natural area of interest or talent or strengths. Those often overlap, by the way. But it's also, and I've done a lot of reading on this, it's also so important that our children do learn about a commitment level where they begin to feel like they are a person who can follow through. They are
Mm.
a person who can commit. And so the challenge, because there's also a lot of parents that are like, well, I was a kid of the 90s and my parents made me do A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. And I really regret that in my childhood. I wish I could have been more of a kid. Right. And so they go the other way of like, oh, if my kid says no and he doesn't want to do this, then no, we're not doing it, and that is, I think, in my experience and opinion, a tremendous disservice from the standpoint that kids never build up the stamina
And
to
the
develop
resilience.
and
Yeah.
the resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really is about, and even in, if you read about grit and resilience and success from the standpoint of people getting to where they want to go, not from the standpoint of like, oh, all these outside accolades, is the single most important factor
Yeah.
is resilience, is whether or not they can stick to a path. That's it. It's not intelligence, it's not natural talent, it's not any of the other things that we think are part of the equation. It is just, do they have the resilience to get there?
And the slippery part of that that's really hard to grasp is that the resilience and determination that you're looking to cultivate is not for any particular aim other than itself. Because it's,
Yeah,
if you are resilient and if you are hardworking and disciplined, that is the character of someone who is in control of their life, who can do good things. As soon as you start to pin that to the outcome, I want to teach my kids to be resilient and determined so that they can become a multimillionaire
that's right.
entrepreneur.
You have
You
to
you
detach from the
you
outcome.
have to detach.
Yes.
The point is, this is where something I find myself talking about quite a lot in the entrepreneurship space is that, you've got, everyone has goals. I want to have a seven-figure business. Why? Because then I'll be successful. What does that mean?
Mhm.
And people don't realize they can be successful way before having a seven-figure business if they only take them a moment to define what success means for them.
Yes.
This is very well articulated in a book called The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, which I highly recommend. But every entrepreneur who sets a goal finds that when they reach it, the goalposts immediately move, and there's never any arrival. Even people that I know, people who have exited their businesses for nine figures, next day they're straight back at it. Because
Mm-hmm.
what are they going to do? Sit around drinking cocktails by the pool? So whichever way you look at it, you end up at a point where the point is the hard work, because
Yes.
that is what makes for a person who is capable, is self-reliant, and is in control for no other purpose than to be the master of your own destiny. And that's, I think, what I want with, certainly with my daughters, what I want her to develop is the ability. I think the main thing the mindset that I want to instill in her is a healthy skepticism of predefined paths
Mm.
um and and directions that put you on a pathway where you're competing with everyone else. So if you
Yes.
go down there, banking or law or medicine or whatever it is, you're put on a pathway where realistically the only differentiating factor you've got is the amount of time you've been doing it, which is why people get promoted based on seniority rather than ability. And I want her to understand that she can do and create anything that she wants. And if she ultimately wants to just become a gardener and work in gardens, spend all her life in nature, um, I can't imagine a better outcome for
Mhm.
her, provided that she chooses that independently.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I'm doing with her right now is we actually started a podcast together,
Oh, how
and
fun.
and so because I want her to, I'm not trying to teach her to be an entrepreneur, but I want her to understand that she can create,
Yeah.
and that creating things can lead to other opportunities, which make you self-sufficient and self-reliant. So we started a podcast called EJ's Book Review, where she's a big reader. And so what we do is we do a podcast together, just me and her, and we talk about the latest book that she's been reading. So she reviews it. She talks about the characters. Anyone with kids who are around that age, around 8, go and look it up. It's on
I
Spotify
love
and everywhere
that.
else.
We'll have to share that in the show notes.
Yeah, but the
Mhm.
pride that she has when we listen back to her podcast, she goes around and tells all her friends, "I'm on Spotify. I'm on Spotify," and her friends listen to it and say, "Wow, you did that!" And then she listens to it, and she can see something that she's made. And then I show her the analytics, and so look, 3 people in Hong Kong listened to your podcast yesterday. This for me is I mean, you're not going to get taught that in school,
Mm-mm.
and I wouldn't want her to grow up not knowing about that, because that is certainly the direction that things are headed in, and it allows her to be the master of her own destiny ultimately.
Well, I mean, the lesson that you've just talked about is such a powerful one at all ages. And it is really about this ability to create value for other humans, right? And I wish as a young kid, rather than being taught save, save, save every penny that comes your way, which is the lesson, that we were taught around money, like
Yeah,
so
same
many
here.
people, right? It's hard to come by. You have to work really hard for it. Save, save, save. No, I want my kids to live in an abundance mindset where it's not a zero sum game. It is about creation. It is about understanding that you can have an impact that has value and leaning into that and learning that lesson really early, right? I think because none of us can control exterior life circumstances. We can't control what happens to the real estate market. We can't control what happens to the, investment market. We may have to pick up and create new value at any point in our life, right? And if we can learn that lesson young, anyways, I just think it's tremendously powerful. So I love that. I feel like, there's a whole separate conversation we could do around that. I'd love to dig in the time left. And by the way, thank you for sharing so many gems already, but into your own entrepreneurial path. I know you did some time in music, and my one question about that, and then even though I'd love to stay there longer, we'll move into some of the other stuff. Do you see music as a language? Like here, I can see that you're language oriented. Did music feel like a language to you looking back? Talk to me about your experience with music.
I remember being in a class once, and someone asked the question, "What is music?"
Mm,
And the reply was, "Music is truth." And that is, I think, is the experience of the musician, because whether you're a jazz musician who's improvising or you're a classical pianist who's interpreting Mozart, what you're
mm,
trying to do is to get to in the case of the jazz musician, you're trying to translate the ideas in your thoughts and ideas in your brain into music in as authentic a way as possible. And the greatest improvisers, people like Keith Jarrett, for example, who sadly can't really play anymore, but
mm,
the greatest improvisers, when you listen to them improvise, you're very aware that what they are playing is an invention that's coming direct from their minds and their souls, and they're able to translate that directly from inside themselves to the music with no friction and no you don't see technical barriers. You don't see wrong
Right.
notes.
Like this mechanical processing of
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
they are like the painter who's just mastered the depiction of certain things. I mean, that's what you get with music. With I recently did a very I've been binge listening Mozart's Piano Sonata number 16 in C major.
Mm,
And I've been listening to a very famous you know well-known sonata. I've been listening to the way that different pianists interpret the piece. Everyone from Lang Lang to Glenn Gould, and what it's striking how each pianist, and these recordings do tend to be from masters, so they have a kind of imperative to stamp their own personality on it, but they are getting what they're trying to do is to get to the truth. What did Mozart intend when he wrote those notes on a manuscript paper 400 years ago? And so they are kind of in the pursuit of truth. I am not sure I see languages in the same way, honestly,
mm-hmm.
because I see, think of languages as a way to connect with people. And the thing that what people think language is all about, which is correct grammar and a wide vocabulary, actually doesn't matter all that much. And if you need any convincing of this, you can think of everyone knows someone who can just communicate with everybody, even if they only know a few words in a language. They just have that human connection,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't care about grammar at that point because you're achieving your goal. I'm not sure you can say the same about music, because you do need with music you just need such a strong underlying technique that takes decades to develop,
Mm.
that you can't really perform music unless you have
A
you
mastery
can't
of
perform music
it.
to an authentic level unless you have
Yes.
that technical ability. Whereas with languages, I don't
Mm.
think that's true. So I understand the question, but I don't I struggle to form that link.
I love that. No, I love that interpretation. And I do agree that, you know, I mean, there's different levels, right, of performing music. And so, like, I think of the little kids at piano recitals or whatever, learning those first basic steps. And to the extent that music is universal, I think the connection piece is there, meaning that music is a way to connect with the emotions or the humanness of somebody else. And I think that's what makes music so touching. But from the standpoint of, yes, of, for example, being able to play Mozart, you have to have mastered and achieved an understanding of music at a certain level to do that
And
well,
mistakes aren't
right?
allowed. You can't go and play
Yeah.
Mozart and play the wrong notes. I mean, you just can't do it.
No, you can't. No, you can't. It doesn't sit the same. But I do love that. And I love the distinction as well. Um, Let's fast forward. I know we've spent, and I love these topics. I could honestly stay there all day. And I'd love for you to share with us some of the gems along the way that you have really pulled out of your entrepreneurial career, right? Because there's some super important lessons that many of us listening are in the middle of, or are still learning, or we haven't got to yet, right? So share with us like kind of a quick survey of some of the most important lessons that you have gone through on the entrepreneurial side.
Wow. I mean, there are so many.
There are so many, I know. So pick your
It's hard to know
favorites.
where to start. But
Mm-hmm.
there are certain things that I find coming up over and over again. I mean, so for context, I mean, story learning, where what we do is we teach foreign languages to
Mm-hmm.
English speakers. So our typical customer would be someone much like yourself, actually, who is interested in languages, who might want to learn Korean, and they come and learn from us. And we are we're a multi-million dollar business. We do 7 figures of revenue, 7 figures of profit. Um, but we've grown slowly over 10 years. And the thing that makes story learning what it is, I fundamentally believe, is the fact that the thing that we do, which is to teach languages through stories, which is our
Mhm.
USP, is a deeply effective way to learn. There's
Mhm.
nothing about it that is a marketing hack, which is to say that what we offer is genuinely valuable in the marketplace. There are so many things to learn around business and marketing and sales and all of that. But when you strip that all away, a great product counts for so much and does most of the work for you. It's certainly true that you can't build anything at scale with a product that is not excellent, because reputation will stop that from happening. So, when doing what I do, so my business newsletter at ollyrichards.co, my avatar there is a six-figure online education business owner. So someone a
Mhm.
lot like me, who is teaching, whether it's music or languages or legal requirements,
Mhm.
copywriting,
Right, could be any topic, and that's
anything, anywhere where education is
Mhm.
involved. That's who
Mhm.
I'm speaking to. And the message that I always give is trust in your own ability to teach. Whenever anyone comes to me with questions or problems, I rarely even ask about their products in terms of like, how does it work? Because for teachers, people who teach, the product and the teaching is never the problem. That's what we're good at. We can do that with our eyes closed. It's the marketing piece and the business building piece that we struggle with,
Mhm.
because of lingering starving artist syndrome that we all suffer from a little bit. And so the thing that I've really had to learn about over the last 10 years has been how to bring business rigor to the to the subject matter expertise,
Right, to an
which is
area
to
of
say,
expertise, yes.
yeah, which is to say, how do you take that thing that you're an expert at and build a business infrastructure around it that allows you to actually scale? Because many entrepreneurs end up um, being a king with 1,000 helpers. So
Mhm.
you've got the big personality at the center of it, a bunch of people helping them, which is great at the beginning. It's very easy to get traction as a personal brand, very difficult to scale a personal brand. Why? Because
Mm.
you become the bottleneck and you're the center of everything. And so when it comes to that subject matter expertise, one of the main things that has allowed me to scale from 5 to 6 or 7 figures has been to make the hero the method itself. So at the beginning, it was Olly. It was the Olly show. What do I know? I'm going to teach you everything I know about languages. As soon as I defined story learning as a method, we started to reorientate the whole business to make it all about story learning. And I was more the kind of celebrity endorser operating at the sidelines. We could then have a team who come in and actually deliver and fulfill on the method itself. So for educators generally, this is one of the big lessons that you have to learn so that you can continue to grow and you don't hit that bottleneck.
Mm. This is
You know,
such an important point. Like I just love that this is, one of the points that we've reached in this conversation, because even at the beginning, when somebody has an idea and says, okay, I'm going to create a business around this, around my particular expertise, or I'm going to launch a digital version of what I've been doing over here in real life, right? And there, it's really about creating that impact, reaching more people. Um, the choosing of the business name and the brand becomes critical, right? And one of the things that I ask everybody at that point is like, do you know your long-term plans? And it's around what you have just said. So, I think descriptively is that building a personal brand around yourself, it's great if your intention is to, uh, have it always look a certain way and not scale beyond certain limits. But if the goal is to scale beyond some limits that are there initially, you have to look at the branding. You have to look at what is at the center, because you're right. Nobody can build a personal brand and have it grow forever.
Yeah. I mean, what's even more important within that though is to understand exactly what your goals are, right? Because it's
Yes,
also not necessary to continue to scale your business
that's right.
ad infinitum. I'm someone who wants to continue to keep learning. I'm just what we were talking about earlier, right? That the point, the progress and the learning is the point. It's not the end
Yes.
goal, but it's the continuing to develop. So I'm very much like that. But I mentor entrepreneurs from time to time, and one particular uh, woman I'm working with went through this exact journey we're talking about of wanting to scale, wanting to grow, and then realizing from having done it, you know what? I don't want a team. Having a
Yes.
team is my worst nightmare. I'm a terrible manager. I can't I can't even pin down an ops manager who I can allow to do the work. What I actually want is a high performing personal brand that turns over 1-2 million a year, and I live a very nice life. I don't need more. Thank you very much.
That's it. That's
Getting to that
it.
realization is huge, but it's not obvious because
Mm-mm.
if you build for scale, you build a lot of expenses, you have lower margins within your business, which is what you inevitable if you're going to scale. But if you set out and say, you know what, I actually don't need a $10 million business. 1, 2, 3 million will be perfectly fine for me. Thank you very much. Therefore, I'm going to build a lean model,
With
keeping my
that in
expenses
mind.
low,
Yeah.
designing my products in such a way that they don't need a big team to fulfill, and Facebook ads running left, right, and center, and all this expensive software. You build deliberately, then you can build you can have an extremely profitable business that runs as a personal brand. But you've got to be deliberate, because if you're not deliberate about it, you can have let all of these other elements creep in that can sabotage the plan.
Do you think that people have to go the route of having kind of the painful experience of
Yeah.
doing the building and then realize like, oh, this maybe isn't exactly what I want? Does that just seem a consistent path?
There's no way around it, because
Yeah.
the alternative is to take something on faith.
Yeah.
It's to listen to someone like me on a podcast saying, "Oh yeah, you can build a $2 million personal brand." And there's lots of people will say, "Well, that's fine for me. I wouldn't mind. I'd be perfectly happy with a $2 million personal brand. Thank you." But then when they get there, they realize, "Damn, I'm actually ambitious, but I didn't know this about myself until now. I wish I'd done things differently back then, but they didn't,
Mm.
because they didn't know themselves better." But in order to get to know yourself, you've got to go through it to see. Charlie Munger used to talk about a way of um of setting goals, which was I forget exactly what he called it, but it was something like negative selection or something, whereby you don't necessarily know what you do want, but you sure as hell know what you don't want, and so you can
Mhm.
choose your paths in life by simply avoiding the things you don't like, and it's a very effective way of doing things. But you do have to know what you don't like in order to do it. I don't like traveling solo, for example. I've realized that about myself, so I don't do it. Um, and and so I don't see a world in which you can
Skip those hard
build
lessons.
something intentionally on faith from someone else,
Mhm.
because being an entrepreneur, you 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 you, one way or another, you discover the truth about yourself, and you can't. There's no world in which you don't do that. And so I think really you have to go through all kinds of pain
Mhm.
um in order to really end up in the right place. I mean, case in point, a few years back, I'd reached a point where, on paper, you really couldn't imagine a really a better situation. I mean, story learning was, we already had 7 figures in profit. I had just moved down to the countryside. I had a full management team in place. I was working 2, 3 days a month, maybe, whilst, being pretty comfortable. For the previous 7 or 8 years, that was my dream. And I thought, "Man, if I could do that, I'd be so happy."
Mhm.
Couldn't have been further from the truth. I felt lost as soon as I got to that stage. Didn't know what to do with myself. And as a result, now I'm kind of over the last few years, I've been re-engineering what I do. I even started my business newsletter because I realized I want to be in contact with people like you,
Mhm.
with other entrepreneurs. That's the ship I want to sail in. And yeah, it's more work. I spend 5 to 10 hours each week writing one newsletter. I
Yeah.
love it. And I know I love it. But I only know it because I've been through this path of being so free that it was scandalous, really. But it was enough to realize that it wasn't for me. But think how many people you say, yeah, you could have a multi-million-dollar business and work 2 days a month. People will be banging like,
All right, done. Sign me up.
yeah,
Yes.
no doubt. But I tell you, it's a dangerous game because you don't know what happens inside here. I'm tapping my head right now,
Mm,
but people are listening. Once
yep.
you get there,
Well, in this, there's two things that are really important about what you just said. And I think one is this acceptance around the challenges and the struggles on the path. I think people, it's human nature. We want it to be easy. We want stuff to feel natural. We want also to be good at it, right? And I think we have this idea that like if we're good at building a business or if we're doing it the right way, it should be easier than it is. you know and and what you say, like these lessons don't come if it's easy. These growth points and turning points and these challenging opportunities don't come on the easy path. And it's also a conversation that I regularly have with my clients, because so often, even though we're in the legal world dealing with legal stuff, what we're really talking about is business boundaries and business structure and some of the things that help our businesses run. And we don't know what business policies we may need until somebody really violates our boundaries or makes
yeah.
business really uncomfortable. And then suddenly we're very clear on the policy that we need to help run that particular aspect of our business. So it's just natural that we have these things along the way. And this final piece that you say about, I call it like using joy, like first of all recognizing what brings you joy in your business and using those as the oars to row your boat. Like never let go of that joy, because business without it just becomes like, what am I doing? What have I done all of this for? Right. And so even though it may not make sense to other people, I'm also a big believer in that, like if we're building businesses, we get to build them and be in them the way that feels good to us. Ultimately, that should be the goal. Right. And this is all going to
Mm.
depend on our personal values, what brings us joy, how we like to show
Well,
up.
exactly. And that's what I was going to mention. That you have to know what brings you joy. So just to loop back to
Yeah.
to the point I just made, you can assume that certain things will bring you joy when in reality they don't. So my whole presupposition was having tons of free time and loads of money would make me happy. Turns out not the case. What I know now makes me happy is a feeling of progress and learning within my business,
Mm.
even if that means spending my time doing things I frankly rather not do, or don't fill me with excitement. But it's the distinction between happiness and joy, and I never remember which is which. One is short, one is in the moment, fleeting. One is the kind of longer term satisfaction, like kids and stuff
Mhm.
like that. I think the longer I do this, the more I understand what longer term fulfillment looks like. And as a
Mhm.
result, I'm much more willing to make compromises in the present moment because I don't want to look back and think like I think one of my biggest fears is looking back and saying, I just didn't do what I was capable of, or I didn't meet my
Mm.
potential. And and then you kind of got these questions, these follow-up questions of why do you need to meet your potential? I mean, that takes you to, takes us back to an earlier conversation. But I know that about myself, and I'm just kind of
Yes.
accepting it because
Yes.
the work is the point. And as we were saying earlier, so yeah, I think whichever way you skin the cat, you get back to this question of knowing yourself and knowing what brings you
Mm.
joy or happiness and which you want to prioritize. And
Mm.
it's nothing easy about it.
No, no, it is not easy. And I think that's actually the whole point of this podcast. I launched it when COVID was just coming over the ocean to the US,
Yeah,
right?
sorry about
And
that. That was
I know, thanks. No, and we were in Seattle, ground zero was here, but I thought nobody's talking about this and nobody's talking about what it's going to do to small businesses from the standpoint
Mm,
of isolation, from the standpoint of everybody having to move online, even though they've known that for years, they haven't done it, you know. Anyways, and so part of my goal with the podcast was this idea around longevity, around sticking with it, around like being able to do the work to figure it out, right? Because to the extent we have people doing and building things that they love, the world is just a better place. It just is. And so anyways, I love that you got there. I love that we're here and I've totally taken you over time. For folks that are listening that are thinking like, "Oh my gosh, this Ollie guy is so interesting. I need to go look at his work. I need to sign up for his newsletter." Clearly, you're a teacher at heart. Like I heard you say, so much of your joy comes from like the learning and the progress and leaning into
yeah.
the potential and also teaching that. I can see that like your commitment to your newsletter is also about helping others do that and teachers are you can't people who are designed to teach, you cannot take it out of them.
I'm so glad I'm so glad you recognize that, because I feel like people don't understand that often. But I've always done that. When I was a musician, I would teach music. When I
Mm,
learned languages and I taught languages with business, having spent 10 years learning, I can't suppress the desire to pass it on. I think it's just a personality thing.
totally,
Mm.
totally. And I think it's also true that certain people are designed to teach. We all know people who are like almost like idiot savant category, meaning that they are so good at what they do and they just make it look easy, but you ask them to teach it and it's like speaking a
Yeah, I
different
know a few people
language,
like that.
right? You know, and then there are people who also can master it, but they can teach as well. We need those people in the world listening to that calling to teach. So one, I appreciate you. I'm so glad you have a newsletter. I'm so excited to share it with my audience. If you're listening, do hop over to the show notes. You can find them at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Find Ollie Richards' episode. But Ollie, tell us where you are. Where do you show up online? Where, for people that are wanting to connect with you, where would you like them to go?
Sure. So best thing to do would be to sign up to my email newsletter, which is at ollyrichards.co, Olly, richards.co, not .com. Because some guy from Google called Ollie Richards has got the .com and he doesn't answer his email, so I can't
Rude.
buy
That's
the
so
domain. So if you're
rude.
listening, Ollie
Right.
Richards, I want your domain. Yeah, so I send very, very long, in-depth emails about specifically about scaling online education businesses. So you can find me there. When you do sign up, you'll also get a case study that I've written, which is 117 pages, and it breaks down the entirety of my business, Story Learning, the language business, and how it works, how we do sales, product marketing, and some other thoughts on lifestyle and things like that as well. People tend to really like that case study, so you'll get that when you sign up. You can also find me on YouTube. You can search for Ollie Richards, but your thing is, you'll get a lot of I have a big YouTube channel on languages, so you'll probably find it's been pointed out to me that you'll probably struggle to find my business YouTube channel. So what you should probably do is go to my website at ollyrichards.co and just look for the link. So then
Follow the
you'll find the
lead.
YouTube. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. You can search me there, and I would love to connect.
Awesome. Well, we will share all those links. I am personally excited to go also check out your 117 page paper. People, if that scares you, don't let it, right? You can consume that in bite-sized pieces.
People email me and say like, Ollie, I've just read the whole thing in an evening. They stay up until like 4 a.m. reading
Oh, I
it.
believe it. That's
Like,
how I am. Like I will start a book and it's like, you know, sometimes I'm reading 5 books at once and sometimes I am just like plowing through. So I get it.
that's the lawyer in you, I think.
I know, right? It's anyways, I'm so grateful to have you here today. I'm so excited for people to get to know more about your story and be able to learn from you through your newsletter, through this 117-page document. Ollie, what final thoughts do you have to leave people with? Whether it's an action steps, you know, something that they should go do, whether it's just a lesson or a quote, what would you like to leave people with today?
You know what? I'm going to share the quote that is at the beginning of my case study.
Mm.
because I think it kind of sums up everything we've spoken about today. And it's from a book called The Journey by James Norbury. And he said the quote is the following. It's about two characters called a Tiny Dragon and Big Panda. And Tiny Dragon says, "But you always seem to know all the answers." Big Panda grinned. "Well, I've made a lot more mistakes than you."
Yeah, boom, there it is. This is true. Woo, bring on the mistakes, right? Fail forward.
Bring on the mistakes. Don't beat yourself up about them.
No, totally.
Head
Move
down,
on,
carry
learn
on.
the lesson and move on. That's right. I love it. Ollie, thank you so much. I am so grateful for you and your
Thank
time
you. It's been a
today.
lot
And
of fun.
I'm so glad. Well, I look forward to being in touch and maybe at some point there's a round 2 to this.
Be a pleasure. Thank you.